Thanks for staying with News at Prime tonight. Now, unions have revealed plans for a secondary strike at South African Airways. The airline says it's worried about the viability of its future if the strike carries on. SAA has asked unions to reconsider their position, adding that it's already under severe financial strain. For more on the story, I'm joined by Gerhard Papenfus, who is the CEO of the National Employees Association of South Africa. Also joining me is Labour analyst Andrew Levy. Thank you both for your time tonight. I suppose it's quite a conundrum that SAA finds itself in, one that's been a long time coming and in fact has been unfolding over a number of years. But for the workers who are desperately trying to not only earn a decent wage, but to keep their jobs, how should they be negotiating with an employer that has to try and find 2 billion by the end of November in order to stay afloat? Let me begin with you.
Yeah, you know, negotiating with a bankrupt employer is, you know, you just don't have any bargaining power, and the SAA is bankrupt. It is bankrupt. It's costing the taxpayer 500 million a month to keep the thing afloat. So, you know, in the real world, SAA would not have been in existence anymore. But, you know, to some extent, they do not find themselves in the real world. They find themselves in a situation where the state bails them out. And I understand it's a difficult decision to close them down. Or, you know, and you don't know everything, you know, what's happening behind the scenes. But the point is, I don't think, you know, what I hear is that SAA can't make it. It is beyond the point where they can be saved.
It's one thing hearing Gerhard say, well, you simply don't have any negotiating power, but for an SOE that's received to the tune of about 57 billion over the last while, just to keep it existing and afloat, certainly I don't think that that's a statement that's going to hold any weight with the unions.
The union is going to have to come to terms with reality, and this could well be the moment which is the defining turning point for South Africa, because if the government blinks first, then in point of fact it's going to redouble the difficulties it faces in Eskom. We have another review coming up from Standard & Poor. We're on a negative watch already from some of them. We've heard words from the government, from Tito Mboweni, from Pravin Gordhan. We know what they're saying. And so the question is, we are going to see within the next week or so if their money is indeed where their mouth is, or vice versa. Hopefully, because there's no money, so hopefully we've still got some mouth. The fact of the matter is that if we see NUMSA at this stage threatening a secondary strike, it's just going to speed the demise. And unfortunately, what I can see is NUMSA are out on a limb. They've put themselves in a negotiating position where they have no power, exactly as Gerhard says. They're going to become increasingly more desperate for a face saver, and if the government won't give it to them, then in point of fact, it really could be almost all over for them as well.
It sounds to me that the unions are in pretty much the same position as SAA is, because they're saying that at least the notice of retrenchments was sprung up on them. It wasn't officially communicated to them. And ultimately, they're going on strike because their workers stand to lose their jobs anyway. So I guess they're doomed if they do, and they're doomed if they don't.
No, I couldn't agree with that, and I'm going to ask Gerhard for his view in a moment. But you know, the one thing is for sure, you don't save jobs by going on strike. The union's allegation that this was sprung on them, one simply got to say, where have they been for the last 5 years or so? Equally, to say that the strike is to try and save jobs, well, how do you try and save jobs when you're demanding 8% from a bankrupt employer, which is several percent above the average level of settlement, is twice the inflation rate? This honestly may make sense in cloud cuckoo land, but I think we're still in South Africa.
Gerhard, an entity that doesn't have money, but But of course, NUMSA has been at pains to highlight the number of areas where they feel SAA, number one, is wasting money. Number two, has been unable to recoup money where tenders and contracts have been entered into irregularly. Could that be low-hanging fruit for the airliner? If they attended to those issues, would they be in a position to save jobs?
Well, this is the point. If the unions are serious in getting constructively involved, that's a different ballgame. If they say, you know, in order to prevent retrenchment, let's engage to do the following. Now, just regarding the notice of the retrenchment, a retrenchment always starts somewhere. You don't tell a union, listen, I'm going to give you a retrenchment notice next month. It happens one day, and it's always a surprise. It's a terrible surprise, but a surprise. You don't warn them. There's a day where it says, I contemplate retrenchment. There it starts. Now, if a union says, let us engage urgently to see where we can save money, they will actually help the whole of South Africa in doing that. But they're not doing that because they're busy with power play and the so-called mother of all strikes. Now, I know some of these role players. I'm not very concerned when people talk about the mother of all strikes. I mean, that's just phrases that try to impress and, to gain back lost support in the market. But if they can get involved in serious negotiations on these issues, I mean, and that is the role of the union. You know, where were they when there was corruption happening there? Where were they? Where's the union when instead of buying a product at price A, it's bought at price D? And paying 4 times the price because of all the, the backhand involvement in buying stuff. That's killing our SOEs when they don't buy the price, the stuff at the best price. There are tenderpreneurs involved. It inflates the price. Where's the union when that's happening? And it's happening for years. They were not engaged. They didn't engage. Now they want to engage. They should have called this airliner to order when that happened. That is a constructive role of a trade union. What's happening here is not constructive. Of all, it's going to lose jobs.
Of course, it's also quite interesting to hear of a union going on strike and now having to call for a secondary strike when you say that its power is as diminished as you believe NUMSA and SACA are in this particular instance?
Again, it's an indication of desperation, and it's happening very early on. So I would think the union understands where they are and perhaps are beginning to feel that chill feeling down the spine that maybe SAA mean what they say, and we'll see that very soon. But obviously, they've gone on strike in SAA. They can't do worse than that. So what do we do now? We make the threat of the mother of all strikes, as Gerhard has said, and we threaten the secondary strike. Now, there are technical difficulties in their way. They need to give proper notice, and there could be a legal issue as to whether they are justified in going on a secondary strike. But it's difficult to get people who have jobs to go on strike in support of people who are not going to have jobs. Equally, the strike will become more and more desperate because NUMSA will look for more and more of a face-saver, which, if the government doesn't give it to them, will lead to violence and sabotage. I'm
interested by this opinion that says, and it's one that Business Leadership South Africa has also expressed, that says government, the Public Enterprises Minister and the Finance Minister should stay out of this matter and allow SAA to deal with it with the unions. Is that practically possible, given the kind of influence that those shareholders have had at parastatals like SAA?
You know, if a bankrupt employer sits with a trade union with no money, he's just returned from the bank, and the bank says, we're not giving you a cent. He doesn't have any negotiating power. You know, that he can't, well, they don't have the power. He can't give anything. What employers do normally, in that case, they walk out, lock the door and go home. But because what can you give? And you wait for the reality to kick in with the unions. The only money is the taxpayers' money, and that is represented, the taxpayers' money is represented by the Minister of Public Enterprise. So he must be involved. The employer here, SAA's board, doesn't have a cent. They can't give anything. The minister is the one that says, if at all, yes, you can give that, because he takes it.
So do you think the ultimate decision here on the future of SAA is going to rest with the minister's office?
Absolutely. My view is absolutely. It's the board can sign any deal. If there's no money, it doesn't mean anything. So no, to say the minister must stay out of this is totally nonsense. That cannot happen. The minister is the guy that will determine eventually what happens, and everything will turn on what the minister says.
What about those employees then who are sitting, I imagine, at least the 900 that we're anticipating would be among the first affected by this, the first round of retrenchments? Anything that they can do to protect themselves, Andrew?
Look, one is immediately sympathetic, because their chances of finding more employment anytime soon is very, very slim. The best chance they've got is to engage constructively with or through their trade union to try and limit the damage and to get the best deal they can, rather than trying to hold out against what is an unstoppable force. The real issue here is, and we'll see very soon, this is the acid test. Does government mean what it says? When it says we've got to stop hemorrhaging money with doomed SOEs, we've got to deal with Eskom, we've got to deal with SAA. And this is the time to show they mean what they say.
Given the fact that there doesn't necessarily seem to be clear political consensus on whether SAA should be shut down or stay open, many experts are saying, well, this is the beginning of the end for SAA, that beyond this point, it can no longer be safe. But without that political will, do you think that it's even possible to have a conversation that says this could be the end?
Well, that is exactly the point. If there isn't the political will to put an end to it, and put an end to it now, and sell off what you can and do the best that you can, and that's what the union should be doing, then in point of fact, it means the government does not have the political will to tackle Eskom, and it doesn't have the political will to do what it knows it needs to do. And on that basis, frankly, our outlook is a very, very bleak one.
Gerhard, very briefly, what happens then to the 57-odd billion that was already pumped into SAA?
That's bye-bye. That's bye-bye. Just to add on what Andrew said, is if there's anything that the unions can do, is to go to Eskom's board and say, here we sit, we're honest, we want to find a way to save this, to save SAA, and we will honestly engage to see where we can save money. Increases will have to be freezed, and there are millions of places where money can actually be saved. The problem why nobody is interested in buying SA is exactly because of the role of the unions, because if you negotiate measures to improve the productivity and the viability of, they're not in the game. That's the only way they can save their jobs. But they're not in that mode. They're not actually used to do that. But they'll have to change very quickly.
All right. Well, certainly doesn't sound like a great future then on the cards for the country's airline, SAA. And of course, many have said, well, it's not worth it being a national carrier if it's going to be as shambolic as it is. Let me thank both gentlemen then for their time tonight. I'm back in a moment with